What's up everyone? In today's video we are gonna react to how one player redefined Marth, but before we get started, please make sure to give a follow here on YouTube to ShalerYT, the original creator of the video, and I'll also make sure to link to the original VOD in the description and also in the pinned comment below the video, so please make sure to check out the original video as well and give them a subscription. Now let's get started with the video.
Marth is a strange case in the world of Super Smash Bros. Melee. A character widely considered top 5 throughout the lifetime of the game, he's a character that has always had representation in the top levels of the game, and yet has always had some big issues. Marth has been a character plagued by the weird low tiers and even the other top tiers. So if this character is so good, why is it that he seems to struggle so much? Well, you see, Marth in Melee is actually an extremely matchup based character. For the most popular character in the game, Fox, you have to play a heavy grab-based combo game, whereas against Jigglypuff you need to play a more slow-paced, neutral, and very specific kill confirms where one missed grab can spell death. This caused Marth to not be considered worth the hassle of learning these niche matchups at the top level, and ended up just being a spacey killer tool for a decade. It would take a player who was inspired by the Smash Bros. Documentary, watching the likes of Ken and M2K do their thing, to be inspired to take solo Marth all the way.
Real high.
Oh, that's gonna be Zain! And Zain takes Genesis 7 to...
Zain Nagami is the current best player in the world, and started playing in just...
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, okay, of course, like earlier on I feel like it was more common that players had like a bunch of characters in their roster, right? I mean, I think if you compare back in like 05, 06, it was like much more frequent that people used to play a bunch of characters. So I mean, of course, like naturally, like if they played a lot of characters, if they felt like Marth was tougher in one matchup, for example, like let's say Sheik, and they already had the Fox, it was like, why not? So I mean, I think that's part of the reason, but also like Marth is undeniably a crazy good character, but compared to like essentially every other good character, not quite maybe, but like more or less, consistent kills can also be very hard. And I mean, of course, as players get better, that type of weakness with Marth, that he can struggle to kill consistently, it becomes less and less of a problem. But even you know, sometimes you can see these like scenarios where someone like Zain, for example, he gets them up to like 180, 190%, and yeah, that's a clear weakness. And honestly, like in clutch type of scenarios, despite Marth being so good, I feel like he's a relatively weak character when it comes to like clutching game 5s, last stock, last hit, because the last hit is not really last hit for Marth often, but for his opponents it very well may be.
2014, just a year after the influx of players from the documentary and EVO 2013. His rise has been astronomic, at the speed most people can only dream of. However, his come up started a little differently to most Marth players. When people think of unranked Marth player and an upset, the first thought that comes into your head is, what spacey player did they beat? It's just a classic of our time. A great spacey player gets caught off guard, and a Marth whose punish game is just on that day. However, Zain was different. You might think that his first big win was on Leffen at Smash and Splash, where he single-handedly made Marth Fox 60-40. And while that certainly put him on the map at the time, his first big upset at a major would actually be 2 years before that, and came from the most unlikely of places. At the Big House 6, Zain would play a small-time Sheik player you might have heard of, called Plup. Zain wouldn't just upset Plup, he would 2-0 him, and watching back from the VODs, it looked damn confident as well. You can tell that this wasn't an accident. Zain had studied this matchup and found ways to break through Plup and the Sheik to start his career. It would take another 2 years before that big Leffen upset, and Zain's burst onto the Melee scene. But while the Leffen win...
Yeah, I actually remember Zain set against Plup. I, at the time, did not know who Zain was. And I remember seeing the final game. Not even the entire final game, but like maybe 80% of that match. And I was like, damn, that's a great player. That's a great player. And I mean, of course, eventually I got to like play against Zain myself. But yeah, I do remember being incredibly impressed that someone I wasn't even sure who he was like beating Plup. And Plup, obviously, super fantastic player. Had a lot of like very high placements at various tournaments, before this big upset. So yeah, it was impressive for sure.
Was big. Many saw it as the classic Marth Fox upset. After all, Zain would drop out of the event at 13th, while Leffen would go on a run all the way to 2nd. What Zain would do to cement himself as a player not to be trifled with would come a few months after that, at Smash Summit 6. No, not that one. Where he would upset Mango in a Game 5 set. Another Spacey. However, what people really didn't expect was what would come next. 2 years in the making, Zain would play Plup in winners semis, where no one would expect him to win. I mean, I remember a friend telling me that there was no hope for this guy versus Plup. He was done, dust, extinct, and yet we would see another Zain victory. He had a huge breakout in what no one would expect from someone playing Marth, once again overcoming that Sheik wall. While Plup would go on to have a long win.
Yeah, I think it still is. Feel more than free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it still is the highest placement a voted in player had at Summit. Saying that getting 3rd place at that Summit. I think that's still the best placement for a vote in at Melee Summits. Maybe it's someone I'm forgetting from one of the later summits, but I think that's the case. And even if not, still incredibly impressive showing.
Win streak against Zain after this. No one really knew at the time that Zain's breakout onto the scene set the tone for his climb to come. Because now let's look at Zain's first big obstacle, the captain himself. Captain Falcon had long been considered on the same level as Sheik in terms of problem matchups for Marth. Marth players at the time struggling versus the character, as shown in M2K's reluctance to even pick the character in favour of his Sheik. Zain himself was not exempt from this struggle. In his first 3 encounters with Wizrobe, they all went to Game 5, but he really couldn't close out a single one. SJ would put an immediate stop to his smash and splash run after his Leffen win, and continued to be a problem for him for the tournaments to come. In fact, through 2018, after his big performance, he would fall in multiple brackets to Falcon players. But yet, not once would we see a different character out of Zain. He stuck rigidly to his guns and improved his game, made adaptations, and in half a year was able to start beating these top Captain Falcons. And not just beat, it was almost like a switch flips once Zain gets that win and cracks the matchup open. Now, he's the favourite. You can see these big shifts in their head-to-heads after that first win. He adapts and he overcomes. But Falcon was an obstacle that always seemed doable. Marth had done it in the past, and what really set Zain apart from his contemporaries was the next 2 characters and their players.
Yeah, before we get into this section of the video, I gotta give credit regarding this point, regarding like adapting, improving. I remember playing quite a bit against Zain at Summit 6 in friendlies, and at the time he wasn't like as strong in the Peach matchup, right? And I do remember we were playing a lot of friendlies, and I think he may have asked first for like some advice in some scenarios, and I was telling him like how I was looking at it. And unlike a lot of other players, what I told him, you could like instantly see that he was like experimenting, testing it out, like try to piece it together like a puzzle. A lot of other people historically, especially like, more mid-level players and stuff, they ask for an advice and it's almost like they're asking for the sake of asking, and it's just ignored. And sometimes it's even like, yeah, I always do that. It's like, no, you're not. But someone like Zain, you could see like immediately he was trying to like implement it, understand it, and execute it. So extremely impressive. And honestly, like I think that to me that was like a key moment where I really felt like Zain is going to be an amazing player. So yeah, just wanted to share that
he would need to beat if he wanted to catch them all. Back in 2018, Hungrybox was at the top of his game, and in his second run to #1 in the world. Not only that, his reputation versus Marth is exceptional. He simply did not lose to Marth. So much so that people would incessantly talk about that one time PewPew beat him at Apex over and over again, because it was just such a standout event.
One of those matchups where like on paper Marth wins, but when you watch the matchup, Marth be struggling. Yeah. Pretty hard.
Zain would feel this force firsthand when up against HBox, with him snuffing out any potential runs Zain might have had. And unlike Zain's other matchups, these didn't look close. 3-0, 3-0, 3-0. would Zain need to pick up another character? Were Marth's weaknesses in the matchup just too much to handle? Well, if I've established anything thus far, that isn't the case. See, what was special about the Pew Pew's set at Apex is that he used a technique called Pivot Tipper to pull out his win on HBox. This tech allowed him to confirm kills on Puff after a grab, erasing a bit of the struggles in the matchup that Marth had finding kills. It was at Super Smash Con where we would really see this take effect. And while at times it looked shaky, Zain would utilise Pivot Tipper, as well as an untrue chain grab that just seemed to somehow work to erase some of HBox's stocks. Not only that, Zain had also done something smaller to mitigate a big weakness for Marth, his grab. You see, when Marth tries to grab a crouching Jigglypuff, it just goes straight over her head, which Puff can then punish with her one-hit kill move, Rest. Zain got around this by not going for the much better frame-wise jump cancel grab, but instead using Marth's dash grab, which, while worse in terms of lag, will grab Puff while she's crouching. This just shows how Zain split himself from the pack of other Marths. He was willing to make these complete shifts in muscle memory in order to beat down a matchup.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, the confirms in the Pivot Tipper, like, they are basically, like, required to play this matchup. Like, as we'll talk about, very, very hard to kill otherwise in this matchup. So yeah, absolutely required. And I mean, of course, Zain is going to be the type of player willing to sit down and grind it out.
Whoa. Unlike any other player. And while he wouldn't win the SmashCon set, just one tournament later, Zain would double eliminate HBox to win his first major in Shine 2018. But that wasn't the end for HBox. He came flying back for round 2 of close sets and wins. But as time went on, we looked towards the modern day, and Zain makes HBox look lost in that matchup. Now we look at Puff Marth differently, all cause of the progress that Zain has made in that matchup. While this shows just how strong Zain is at adapting to matchups, against the next Pokemon, he would show just how committed he is to Marth and his grit to fight through. Axe is a legend of Melee, playing an unlikely character. People have always talked about how much Marth struggles against Pikachu, and a lot of that is solely thanks to Axe and his dominance in the matchup. If HBox was a raid boss, Axe was an insurmountable god in the matchup, boasting a 100% win rate against Marth since 2013. Axe knew just how to take apart Marth, and no matter how good Zain got, Axe would be there to tear him down. Axe would first play Zain in 2018 at Gommel, where it would go 3-1. Next, Summit 7, 3-1. Genesis 6, 3-2. Now, you might be inclined to believe that Zain was getting closer, but 3 years later, and Zain had 8 more sets to try to beat Axe. It has come damn close, but none of them have been successful. Axe just clutches them out every single time.
That's beautiful.
Through 2020, Zain would start to take his place as number 1 in the world, but even then, Axe would beat him.
Yeah, and I think it's also like one part, like there's a few things to remember here as well. Like, I mean, it's, you know, old now, but like some of Axe's like more, you know, players, good players, you know, closer to where he lived. He did get more Marth experience than other top tiers. At least that's always been my impression. But it's also like Marth is like Pikachu's least bad matchup of the top characters, pretty much. I mean, I guess maybe Falcon, but like besides maybe Falcon, then Pikachu does significantly worse against like Fox, Peach, Puff, Ices. So I mean, for someone like Axe to have a matchup that is like even-esque, I mean, that's already like a huge difference compared to like a lot of these matchups that are like just straight up bad, right? And I mean, of course, harder for someone like Zain to find a practice in the matchup compared to Axe finding the practice against good Marth players. So I mean, there are a lot of factors to it, but this is also like a matchup where it can be like very tricky to both like kill occasionally, to edge guard. But I mean, again, Zain, of course, made a lot of improvements in the matchup.
When he was underperforming online, it felt like a wall that just couldn't be toppled. Any other top player in the world might have looked for a new character with a better matchup against the Yellow Mouse. Ice Climbers, Sheik. But whether it was stubbornness or pride, Zain stuck it out. And in 2022, after nearly a decade of Axe never losing to Marth, Zain would try for the first time out offline after his ascent, and it would go all the way to Game 5.
The 69-0. Impressive. But also, I think, like, I haven't talked to Zain about this, but I think it's probably a few combinations. Like, picking up a different character that might be very favorable against one person, right? But then it's also like, how is this going to impact your main character against everyone else, right? There is advantages to having two characters. If you're playing off with one, maybe the other one is playing better. But it's also like, you know, swapping back and forth between characters, making sure they're both, you know, ready when you need them. That's also like a disadvantage. So, I mean, I don't know if we're saying maybe it was like pride related, but maybe he also felt like, sure, I'm going to have a tougher time against Axe, for example, or other players historically, but he might have felt like it was the better play overall, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Zain shares a similar mindset that is more about like minimizing the amount of times you're losing. You're always going to lose at some point, right? But it's more like minimize the losses, maximize the amount of times you win. And of course, people could look at that differently, right? And sometimes for some players, picking up a secondary for certain players, certain matchups, that's what they might believe is, you know, the overall better choice. But sometimes some players might feel like, no, sticking to this one character, it's overall going to be better long term. But with that said, like, apparently Zain has been practicing his ICs for Sheik. So, you know, maybe we have seen a little shift from Zain there. I still haven't seen it in actual tournament play. Maybe it's happened in like some smaller event, but I'll be interested seeing him, you know, test out Ice Climbers versus Jmook or Blop. I don't know. Overall, I also feel it's very important, like, how do you feel, right? Sometimes you have people, they are like, oh, you know, like, let's say Marth Fox then, right? You have someone like Cody, he grinds out Fox Marth, he feels like it's worth it, he feels like it's the better choice for him. And then you have Leffen, who feels Sheik is a better choice for him compared to sticking to Fox. So you have two players, absolutely amazing, two different approaches. And I'm not even going to say like this one is right, this one is wrong. I think it's more like, which one do you believe is better? That's the one you should go for. Like, if Leffen feels playing Sheik is better overall, not only for Marth, but also like overall as a player, then that's what you should do, right? Same thing with Cody if he feels like sticking to Fox is better. Or in Zain's case, if he feels like, you know, Marth Sheik is not really worth it. It's not like I can't win, but you want to like maximize the wins, minimize the losses, right? I think sometimes that's like kind of, how do you say, like misunderstood. Like, even if you can win, if you want to be someone like Zain, like, you know, always contesting for number one, it's not about can I win this one set or these two sets. It's how do I win the most amount of sets possible. So I think that's important to remember. And I feel like sometimes people mistake that. And they're like, oh, this means this matchup is impossible. And then if someone like wins a set once in a matchup, it's like, see, this is not impossible. But it's not about if it's impossible or exactly how hard it is. It's about winning as much as you can. That's what it comes down to.
Then Zain would take it. After literally 4 years, Zain finally topples the insurmountable god of that matchup. I can't even tell you what he changed. I'm sure these two are on another level in that matchup, to the point where I would be afraid to just tell you things that are just straight wrong. However, what is evident is his perseverance and willingness to try again and again to get it right with his character. At Shine, Zain even flew out another top Pikachu to practice against, just for Axe, and spent hours grinding on his stream. Since his ascent in Melee, Zain has shown that he's not one...
Yeah, I was going to say, I respect that. Flying out, you know, just to get more practice in when needed. So I totally respect that.
...to give up. And that's why, even though in the modern day Sheik is still giving him trouble with the new obstacle in Jmook, and you have people talking about what character he should pick up on Reddit, I don't think that history shows that that's what he'll do. Zain seems determined to prove that he is just the best Marth to ever do it, against all inconsistencies. And no matter the changes he needs to make, Zain has changed and continues to change how we think about Marth. And I don't think that that's gonna change anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, another solid video. I liked it. And again, I'm curious to see how this Ice Climber potential arc is going to play out. I absolutely could see it being more beneficial But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens at these next, massive tournaments that's going to happen in the summer. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. And as I said at the start of the video, please give Shaler YT a follow here on YouTube. I'm sure they would appreciate it a lot. And thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.